A young Cape Bretoner's first venture into filmmaking will soon be released on the home video market. Things is a horror film shot and produced in Toronto, and now negotiations are underway for distribution.
I'll be okay. I'll be okay.
The movie is called Things, and it stars a former resident of the town of New Waterford, Barry Gillis.
He phoned me up one night around 2 a.m. and said, "Are you still interested? Are we going to be partners?"
I go, nightmare, obviously.
I'll be okay. I'll be okay.
Barry, it looks like a movie that would create a lot of nightmares for a lot of people.
I'll be okay. I'll be okay.
Is this the start to your stardom, you think?
Yes, I hope so.
Film is a magical art form. It can make you laugh, make you cry, and make you scream like almost nothing else can. This series is about films that make you do those things, sure, but it's mainly about films that make you say, "What? Huh? Was that intentional?" My name is Connor. I'm a filmmaker, educator, and connoisseur of terrible, terrible films. I'm here to be your guide to the realm of cinematic schadenfreude. It's Trashterpiece Theater, the very best of bad movies. Things is a Canadian independent horror film released direct-to-video in 1989. I wrote that line of the script and then sat and stared at it for a few minutes because, frankly, I didn't even know where to start. I guess this is as good a place as any. I hear the following description used for horror films so often that it's become cliche, but in this case, I wholeheartedly believe it applies. Things is like experiencing a nightmare. The gritty Super 8 visuals assault your ocular nerve. The feverish, distorted sound design bites at your ears. And just like a real nightmare, there are times throughout the film when you have no idea where you are and can't recall how you got there. Many films have been referred to as the worst ever made, some of which we've looked at in previous episodes. I don't say this lightly. Things is worse than all of them. A true contender for the title of worst film ever made. Let's take a look at why that is, but a word of caution. Things may very well be looking back at you. The golden age of Canuxploitation. Don't worry, I'll explain what that means. As always, we need to set the stage for this horror show. In this case, the stage is Canada. In 1968, Canada's government opened the Canadian Film Development Corporation, the CFDC. The CFDC was originally allocated a $10 million budget to finance film productions located in Canada. The CFDC's predecessor, the National Film Board, had been mainly focused on creating war films and propaganda. This new organization was intended to help finance film projects with more box office appeal. Films that would directly inject more money into the Canadian economy. After blowing through their initial $10 million budget, the CFDC shifted gears. In 1974, Canadian tax laws regarding film production were modified. Tax credits, called CCAs, capital cost allowances, were increased from 30% to 100%. This meant that filmmakers could deduct all of the money spent on a film from their taxes. The only stipulations were that the film had to be shot in Canada, and the crew had to be at least 2/3 Canadian. Otherwise, you're good to go. Tax-free. As a result, American production companies began shooting in Canada with Canadian crew in order to take massive tax exemptions. This became known as the tax shelter era. In the 70s and 80s, over 350 feature films were shot in Canada under the new CCA laws. Some of these films would become highly influential, especially in the horror genre. The tax shelter era also saw the rise to prominence of director David Cronenberg. Cronenberg's work undoubtedly influenced the creators of Things to a high degree. However, the tax shelter era was also fraught with corruption. Investors were reporting large budgets for small film projects, then only spending a small fraction of that amount on the actual production. Essentially, this allowed them to write off taxes entirely on a huge portion of their income. Eventually, some of the films weren't even being shown publicly, and it's likely some of them weren't even made at all. One government report in 1979 found that out of 66 Canadian feature films that received a CCA that year, over half were never released. In the early 1980s, the proverbial shelter wasn't collapsing yet, but it definitely had one of its supports removed. In 1983, the CCA on Canadian films was cut to 50%. In 1987, it was cut back to 30%. Gone were the tax shelter films with bloated budgets, but gone also were many independent, low-budget productions who could no longer afford their tax bill. However, the end of the 80s also coincided with another touchstone event in independent cinema, the rise of the home video market.
Shaping up your video is as easy as this with the HR7100 video recorder from JVC. With color-coded feather touch controls, fast shuffle search, a 10-day timer, and full-function remote control. JVC's HR7100 is simply great video.
VHS had been around since 1976. But by the late 80s had established a stranglehold on the home media landscape. Independent, low-budget films that would never conceivably see a mainstream theatrical release could now instead go straight to VHS, marketing their product directly in video stores across the country. Cheaply made genre films dominated this market in Canada as in other countries. Slasher films, revenge movies, sex comedies, and erotic thrillers. These formed the sleazy, low-budget bedrock of the Canadian home video market. Collectively, this subsection of low-budget exploitation film is often referred to as Canuxploitation. The term doesn't necessarily mean that the film is overtly Canadian in its content or aesthetic, although this is sometimes true. Mainly it means that the film is independent, often low budget, often a genre piece, and was made in Canada. All of these descriptors apply to the main subject of this episode.
Something went wrong.
I'll say.
Shut up!
Towards the end of this home video boom, enter two men, Barry J. Gillis and Andrew Jordan. Gillis and Jordan met in high school in the suburbs of Toronto and bonded over their mutual love of low-budget horror films and heavy metal music. As teenagers, the two friends entertained themselves by shooting short, mostly improvised horror films on home video. At some point in the early to mid-80s, Gillis and Jordan started shooting an original feature film on an RCA home video camera with the ambitious title, Brutal Violence! According to Gillis, the shoot was a complete disaster and they eventually scrapped all the footage. Gillis and Jordan determined that they would need to come up with some real money in order to realize their vision of a feature film. Armed with some cash from Jordan's parents, a Super 8 camera, and a story outline, the two men and their collaborators entered the wilderness on the outskirts of Toronto. The world was not ready for the cinematic alchemy they would ultimately produce there. The story. The film opens with a guy who looks like Canadian Napoleon Dynamite watching a woman wearing a devil mask strip fully nude. Yeah, we're really hitting the ground running with this one. He asks her to have his baby. She reveals that she's already had the baby, but it's actually a weird demon creature instead. Psych! It was a dream. The man, whose name is Doug by the way, brings his ailing wife Susan some pain medication.
I brought you some of these to help you ease the pain.
Thanks, I hope they work. I feel like I'm gonna die.
And with that, roll the opening credits. Believe it or not, this is probably the most coherent part of the entire film. Two idiots named Don and Fred travel to Doug's cabin in the wilderness. When Doug appears to not be around, they decide they have nothing better to do than to drink some of his beer. Don inexplicably finds a tape recorder and a book of occult diagrams in Doug's freezer. The tape contains nonsensical chants, leading to Don making an unsubtle reference to Evil Dead.
How'd that movie start that you're always talking about? You know, that weird one with all those weird things?
After playing the tape, Don gets a little warm, so he decides to put his jacket in the freezer. You know, as you do. Doug randomly appears and scolds them for being loud while his wife is sleeping, then just leaves. Don and Fred fart around in the kitchen, look for bugs to eat, and eventually decide to watch TV. Throughout the entire film, random scenes are intercut of this television news anchor. She describes events that are sometimes sort of related to the plot, sometimes not in the slightest.
George Romero, director of such hits as Dawn of the Dead and Creepshow, is once again taking his copyright case to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Back at the cabin, Don and Fred sit down and start watching TV. A dog shows up to join the fun. They channel surf past trashy horror movies and what sounds like a scrambled porn channel, and then for no real reason, Don decides to water down his beer. Doug reappears in the kitchen and makes everyone some delicious cheese sandwiches to eat. When Don gets up to get more beer, Doug puts a dead insect in his sandwich. They talk for a few more minutes about nothing of significance, and then suddenly, boom! These little monster ant things violently burst out of Doug's wife. Things! Okay, now pay attention real close because Doug is going to explain the entire plot. When he and his wife were unable to become pregnant, Doug paid a guy named Dr. Lucas to perform some kind of fertility experiment on Susan. This apparently resulted in her giving birth to insect hellspawn instead of a child, not optimal. At this point, as I think basically anyone would, Don decides to ease the tension of the moment by recounting a completely unrelated story he read in a random horror novel. Doug responds how you typically respond when your wife is dying in the next room while your brother prattles on about nothing.
I didn't mean no harm by it. I was only trying to ease the tension.
Ease the tension, you damn bastard! Ease the tension, you dick!
Then, because Andrew Jordan saw Alien one time, all of the lights go out and most of the rest of the film is lit primarily in red. It's also conveniently established that there's no phone, the nearest town is 9 miles away, and the forest is full of bears. So naturally, everyone is trapped.
Can't do nothing. Might get attacked by bears, rattlesnakes. This is a real creepy place, you know.
Absolutely not contrived at all. After another random news segment that makes no sense, we cut back to the cabin to find that Fred has inexplicably vanished.
What the fuck? Where's Fred?
The two brothers suggest that he either was transported to the 5th dimension or vanished into a mouse hole.
It looks like he got sucked into that mouse hole.
More on this later. Doug and Don discuss the creature problem a bit more in the kitchen, then start drinking whiskey out of paper cups. For a brief moment, Doug embodies the feelings of every person watching the film up to this point. Immediately following is a sequence of the film that I refer to as the bathroom sequence. The first time I saw this film, this is where I started to officially feel like I was losing my mind. I am going to try my absolute best to recount everything that happens in the bathroom sequence. Alright, Don says he needs to use the bathroom. Both Don and Doug go to investigate, then decide they need a flashlight. They go back to the kitchen to get it. One of the things appears, Don murders it with a butcher knife. They retrieve the flashlight and wipe off all the blood. Doug investigates the bathroom with the flashlight despite it already being full of ambient light. Then, after apparently determining that it's fine, Don goes in to actually use the bathroom as originally planned. Doug messes with him by scratching on the door and acting like a jackass. Then Doug himself is apparently also going to use the bathroom. They find a thing sitting menacingly on the toilet. Doug makes this noise. And then Don, seemingly for no reason, shoves Doug into the bathroom, trapping him in there with the monster. There's the sounds of struggling off screen, followed by a toilet flush. They go back to the kitchen to get more weapons, then go into the basement. Okay, so quick aside, how long do you think that sequence was? Describing it took what, a minute? Maybe less? That sequence is nearly 10 full minutes long. Again, more on that later. In the basement, Doug gets bitten by a thing, and Don accidentally brains him with a hammer. Don tries unsuccessfully to turn the power back on, stabs another thing, then carries Doug back up the stairs.
Oh, you're fucking heavy.
In the kitchen, a thing appears absolutely from nowhere, piloted by this pair of hands, and bites a couple of Doug's fingers off. Don is forced to cauterize Doug's wound, but it doesn't do any good. Doug dies anyway, and Don puts his corpse in the storage closet. Don then finds the body of the dog from earlier in the movie and vomits for 90 seconds. I'm not going to show this part, it's actually pretty gross. Don somehow procures a drill, which is sadly not the cool looking drill from the DVD cover art. He murders a few things with it, but then the extension cord he's using to power it comes unplugged. For absolutely no reason, Don can't figure out how to plug the cord back in, so no more drill, I guess. Isn't the power supposed to be out? Whatever. He randomly hallucinates that Doug is still alive, then collapses onto the couch and seemingly blacks out, which is pretty much what I want to do at this point. One random out-of-place news segment later, we're back in the midst of this nightmare. Fred has reappeared completely out of nowhere and is running around like a maniac, killing things with a chainsaw. One of the creatures chews through the extension cord. Don hides in Susan's bedroom while things murder Fred off screen. Eventually, Don leaves the room and finds that Fred is inexplicably still alive in the form of a gory, talking skull on the ground.
Don, I'm still alive! They haven't got me yet! Don, help me! I'm still alive!
I think this is meant to be another hallucination, but with this film, who can even say? At this point, Dr. Lucas himself shows up and looks around the house. Don angrily confronts him about the experiment and its aftermath. Dr. Lucas responds by saying that Don will be blamed for the murders of Fred, Doug, and Susan.
What made you do such a brutal crime?
What made me do it? Your experiment fucked up and you're blaming me?
Don shoves Dr. Lucas in the bathroom where he's seemingly killed by one of the things. He then flees into the wilderness. A short time later, Don comes to a bridge and attracts the attention of a random hiker. The guy helps Doug clamber up onto the bridge, even though he probably could have just walked around. The two men rushed back to the hiker's car, where it's revealed that, psych again! It was a dream also! Don is actually back at the cabin where a blood-soaked Dr. Lucas emerges from the bathroom. Don traps him back in there with what looks like weed whacker line, and then the film ends. The film comes to a close with the most accurate closing title card possible. You have just experienced things. Not watched, experienced. I'm not sure anyone could ever put it more succinctly and accurately than that. Alright, so we've got a lot to unpack here. Breaking down the individual elements of things upon first viewing it is challenging. The sheer amount of baffling stuff in the film has an effect not unlike sensory overload. You can only perceive it as an impenetrable blur of badness. Analyzing the film critically is difficult, not only because it's entirely disjointed, but also it's just plain painful to watch. I've analyzed the film at great risk to my well-being and can now break down the blur of badness into three principal offenders. The visuals, including cinematography and production design, the sound design and the music, and the pacing. First up is the visuals. Don't get me wrong, the visuals are absolutely atrocious by nearly any standard, but in my assessment they are only a small piece of what makes the film so terrible. The film was shot primarily with a consumer-grade Super 8mm film camera. Even though video was coming into its own as a format at the time, Andrew Jordan wanted to shoot on film to get a more cinematic look. Nowadays, many independent productions will shoot on Super 16mm stock to get the distinct look of film more cheaply. However, Andrew Jordan and Barry J. Gillis didn't have the money to shoot the entire film on 16. Super 8 was a much more widespread and cost-effective method, but it comes with caveats. First, Super 8mm film has a smaller film surface and therefore less resolution than Super 16. One frame of Super 8mm film is approximately 1/6 the size of standard 35mm film. On top of that, in order to edit and eventually distribute the film on home video, Jordan and Gillis had to transfer the Super 8 footage onto 3/4 inch videotape. This causes further loss of resolution and detail. The result is that the film on video looks like crap. Elements are fuzzy or washed out, detail is poor, and there's limited dynamic range. Barry J. Gillis has claimed in an interview that the original camera negative looked much sharper before being transferred. To be frank, based on the execution of other technical elements in the film, I don't believe him. The only credit I think I can give them is that they didn't shoot it on consumer videotape, which in the 1980s looked terrible, even in comparison to this. The way the action is shot only adds to the issues. This is partially an editing problem, but in some scenes, it's barely possible to tell what is happening on screen due to poor framing or blocking. Lighting is poorly executed as well, and I'm not just talking about the rip-off red color scheme. Sometimes a character or effect will be so poorly exposed that nearly all detail is lost. The frequent combination of red and blue light makes me think of those fake 3D effects. Your mileage may vary, but I think it's one of the least aesthetically pleasing color palettes out there, especially with so little contrast in so many of these shots. In addition, it's clear the filmmakers were not diligent about maintaining their equipment properly. You can see huge hairs stuck in the film gate in dozens of shots throughout the entire movie. An unfortunate side effect of the film's lighting and framing problems is that it ruins one of its only strengths. Some of the gore and blood effects are not bad. Some of them. However, they are usually framed and or lit so poorly that it's difficult to look at or appreciate them. The same cannot be said for the creature effects. There's no nice way to phrase it, the titular things look ridiculous. Glenn Orr was the creature effect designer for the film who created the things from drawings done by Andrew Jordan. One of the creature props, which the cast nicknamed Irving, could actually move. After a few takes of covering it with fake blood, though, the articulation became much worse. Critics have speculated for years what the creatures are made of, with guesses ranging from styrofoam to fiberglass to papier-mâché. Barry J. Gillis himself says he has no idea what they are made of. He only remembers that between 40 and 50 of them were made, it involved a molding process of some kind, and that their construction included king crab legs purchased in downtown Toronto. These things must have smelled awful. Speaking of awful, let's talk about the film's sound.
You got 'em real good.
Much like in Manos: The Hands of Fate, nearly every line of dialogue throughout most of Things was dubbed in post-production. However, the reasons necessitating this technique were completely different. On Manos, there simply was no sound recording. On Things, production sound was recorded during filming, but the soundtrack was so terrible that the filmmakers decided to dub it over. That's right, whatever they replaced with this
Must have came from a well in West Africa.
was originally worse. According to Barry J. Gillis, there were numerous problems with the original tape, one of the most glaring being camera noise in the background. The strange thing, well, one of them anyway, is that there are scenes with the original production audio still in them, the most notable being when Don reaches the bridge during the fake-out ending.
Can you hear me?
Hey, buddy, you alright?
Even stranger, the dub occasionally overlaps with original audio that was left in the final cut, whether mistakenly or not. You can actually hear both audio tracks playing at the same time, creating a very jarring effect.
I think I'll have another drink.
Music is another major component of the soundscape of Things. To me, it's one of the biggest reasons the film feels so nightmarish. The instrumentation and melodies used are themselves a bit freaky, sometimes sounding like a demented, broken-down circus ride, but more often than not they lean towards cheesy rather than frightening. No, the real reason the music contributes to the overwhelming atmosphere is repetition. Music will loop seemingly forever, or the entirety of a pre-existing song will play through the length of a scene, forcing you to listen to the same riffs for like 4 to 5 minutes. I would give credit where it's due if I thought the disorienting quality of the music was intentional, but I don't, and here's why. First, the original score often sounds improvised. Take this piece from the first kitchen scene.
Yep. It is plastic.
It just sounds like the keyboard player is making stuff up over a percussion loop. Speaking of percussion, this same piece of music demonstrates my other point. The filmmakers left score mistakes in the film. Listen carefully to the music at the beginning of the same scene.
See what we have here.
It sounds to me like the musicians started recording with a drum machine, didn't like the tempo it was set to, and so they just turned it down while the machine was still recording. But they left the faster tempo and the speed ramp in the final cuts. Oh yeah, there's also some bad audio splices here and there too. Finally, we come to what I believe is the biggest reason the film is so agonizing to sit through. The pacing. Oh my god! Scenes go on for far too long. The aforementioned bathroom sequence is maybe the most glaring example of this issue, but there are many more. Let's look at some, shall we? The scene where Don and Fred watch TV in the living room and then Doug makes sandwiches, that sequence is 6 minutes long. When they sit at the table and explain the plot before the lights go out, 5 minutes long. Basement scene, 5 minutes long. And Fred's entirely off-camera ADR death takes nearly 2.5 minutes.
Don, help me! I'm still alive!
Complaining about something being 5 minutes long seems petty, but when it's 5 minutes of pointless dialogue, badly framed action, or both, 5 minutes feels impossibly long. Intertwined with the pacing issue is the acting. Boy, is it terrible. Dr. Lucas, played by Jan Pockrell, is maybe the worst offender.
First off, take a look at the store.
Oh god, what a horrible mess.
Between the chaotic visuals, grating soundtrack, threadbare writing, and excruciating pacing, Things is overwhelming on nearly all fronts. Any of these elements on their own is rough, but together they become simply unbearable, a true cinematic nightmare. There are a variety of reasons for the film ending up this way, but I think the simplest explanation is the filmmakers driving the project. How did this even happen? There's a running theme I've noticed throughout all the stories I've read about this film. Despite an obvious lack of training and insufficient money, the filmmakers kept plowing forward regardless. This is something that comes up a lot in the production of cult movies, and it's usually framed as a testament to human determination or the power of art through adversity. I myself have espoused on this subject many times. Things feels different. The lazy reaction to the technical execution of this film is to say, the filmmakers must have been drunk and on drugs, dude. No. What the filmmakers are is staggeringly incompetent. This is not semi-charming Ed Wood incompetence where there was at least a semblance that he knew what he was doing. This is highly advanced incompetence.
I think you've been reading The Lazy Man's Guide to Living a little too much lately. Next time you come with me, you're staying home.
The film got started with a $3,000 loan from Andrew Jordan's parents. After the production began, they quickly realized this would be nowhere near enough. As production wore on, Jordan repeatedly asked for additional loans up until the film's completion. Barry J. Gillis says that the production was 1 month of filming, followed by a week-long break, then another month of filming. 2 months of filming for a project that looks like this is bonkers, but Gillis can partially explain it. He has stated that sometimes they would perform upwards of 30 takes of a single shot before moving on, making sure that moments like these were captured just right.
I really gotta go to the can bad.
Yeah, well, go then.
There might be some of those ugly creature things in there.
That's right. You wouldn't want any of those things nibbling on you when you get in there.
Another possible reason for the extended production is the lack of pre-planning. I know, these guys not planning ahead? Strange, but true. The two producers moved forward with only a story outline for the film, no completed script. If the film feels like it's being made up as they go, it's because it probably was. This could explain stuff like the tape recorder and book in the freezer that seemingly serve no function to the rest of the story. Barry J. Gillis has, to his credit, at least tried to explain some of the film's more notable gaffes in interviews. Maybe the biggest is Fred's unexplained disappearance after the lights go out. The answer is simpler than you might expect. Bruce Roach, the actor who played Fred, couldn't make it for certain days of shooting. So, Gillis and Jordan just kept right on moving without him. Given the lack of forethought on the project, it seems like Gillis and Jordan assumed they would not be able to shoot with him again. So they wrote him out, only to write him back in once they realized that they actually could continue to shoot with him. The lights going off in the cabin provided all the justification they thought they needed for Fred suddenly vanishing into thin air.
I think you went into the third, fourth, and fifth dimension.
The film had many elements that the producers saw as essential for selling it on the home video market. Blood and gore, violence, weird creatures. During production, however, Gillis and Jordan decided that one element that was missing was nudity. By their own admission, though, they had no idea how to go about hiring an actress who was willing to appear naked on camera. To fulfill this perceived requirement, the filmmakers hired a prostitute from Toronto to play the part of the nude woman in the opening dream sequence. This woman agreed to be in the film on the condition that she didn't show her face. Once the film had been ostensibly completed, Barry J. Gillis started shopping around for a distributor. After making phone calls to numerous distributors in the US and Canada, nobody was biting. One such company, Vestron, flat out said no after seeing the trailer. Others just didn't bother to reply at all. Finally, Barry J. Gillis called Mel Lieberman, president of a distribution company called Let Us Entertain You, Inc. Lieberman agreed to distribute the film to video stores across the United States and Canada. At the same time, porn actress Amber Lynn was making an appearance at a Toronto area strip club. Gillis read about it in a newspaper and told Andrew Jordan, who wanted to try and get Amber Lynn to appear in their film. To give you context, Lynn was one of the most popular adult film actresses of the late 1980s, and at the time commanded over $25,000 a week to perform at strip clubs across North America. Jordan and Gillis showed up at the club and offered Lynn's agent $1,000 to get her into the movie. This was eventually upped to $2,500 for 1 hour of filming. Gillis and Jordan did not have the money to cover that and could not ask Jordan's parents for more cash, especially not to pay for a porn star. Mel Lieberman, the distributor, would end up footing the bill for Amber Lynn's appearance. This segment was shot on 16mm film instead of Super 8 because the filmmakers, probably correctly, assumed that Amber Lynn would just walk if she saw a small, unprofessional-looking Super 8 camera. After shooting these segments on the least convincing TV news set ever, Gillis and Jordan had somehow managed to get one of the most popular porn actresses in the world at the time into their low-budget B-movie. Naturally, they are very proud of this. Despite her small part having virtually nothing to do with the rest of the film, her image and name are all over the film's promotional material. Shortly after Things was picked up for distribution, Barry J. Gillis appeared on local television to promote the film. Listen to what he says when asked a direct question about the film's budget.
Now, it takes a fair amount of money to put a movie together.
Yeah.
How much money in this case for Things?
Well, Things is a very low-budget movie. A lot of people were paid, like, very low wages. A lot of people are owed money, too. And people just want to get credits and things like that.
What did the movie cost?
$350,000.
The actual budget, by most estimations, was closer to $40,000. Andrew Jordan encouraged Barry J. Gillis to lie about the film's budget to make it seem more legitimate. To be fair to them, they have admitted to this multiple times on the record. Speaking of things the filmmakers are being shady about, can we discuss these credits for a minute? The end credits list a crew of almost 60 people. I have almost nothing to substantiate this, but do you believe for even a second that a crew that large worked on this? Let's look at the bare minimum that would have been definitely present on set, not counting the talent that actually appear on camera. Gillis and Jordan are an obvious inclusion as producer and director respectively. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and not assume that Andrew Jordan himself was the camera operator. Let's assume the cameraman, boom operator, and sound recordist are all real people, and to be generous, let's assume one of the assistant cameramen is real too. You do not need 2 camera assistants to run a Super 8mm camera the size of a cigar box. We know that Glenn Orr is a real person, and let's see, throw in one more guy. Let's say he's the gaffer slash swingman. In my estimation, this film could have had a crew of like 6 or 7 people. Definitely nowhere close to 60. Frankly, it's being generous to not just assume that the entire crew was Andrew Jordan and a camera. Short of being shown physical proof of their involvement, there is no way that I can believe that this project had a production manager, casting director, 2 costumers, makeup and hair people, a stunt coordinator, 4 assistant editors, 2 publicists, a script supervisor, and an entire dedicated finance department. One possible way to explain it is that actors and crew actually fulfilled some of these roles, but are listed under pseudonyms to make the crew seem larger. This is similar to what Hal Warren did in the credits of Manos: The Hands of Fate. For the same reason that Barry J. Gillis lied about the budget, they lied about the crew to make the film look more legitimate. Does this matter? Admittedly, not a lot. It just rubs me the wrong way that Gillis and Jordan would lie about something in such a far-fetched way. Frankly, if there was a crew this large, there's no way all of them got paid on a budget of 40 grand. Although, hey, maybe I'm wrong and that's where all the money actually went. It certainly doesn't look like it went into the movie. Here's some conclusions. The first time I ever saw Things was at an all-night B-movie marathon I hosted at the college I used to work at. Things started at approximately 3 a.m., and the experience of watching it in that semi-conscious state was incredibly surreal. I initially chalked up the sour taste in my mouth to me being basically barely lucid during the screening. However, during my research for this video, that sour feeling started to metastasize. What helped me articulate this feeling was this video footage included on the Intervision DVD release of Things. This is from a 20th anniversary special shot in 2009, and man, this footage is bonkers. The production values are sub-local access quality, there's a host with a ventriloquist dummy making awful jokes, and the discussion itself is unbelievably awkward.
So, I hear that there's a cult following your movie, is that true?
Well, it's not a cult that's following it, but it has what's called a cult following.
Is it like, is it a suicidal cult? Because I know that when I was watching your movie, I wanted to kill myself.
What made me take pause, though, was the way that the filmmakers conduct themselves. Specifically the way that Andrew Jordan, Barry J. Gillis, and Doug Bunston talk about women. Frankly, it's gross. All 3 men steer the discussion towards how making the movie has affected their success with getting laid. Jordan's favorite scene is, guess what, it's the one with the naked girl. Most disgusting of all, I think, is this. Listen to what Doug Bunston says to this poor woman who's co-hosting the special.
Hey, little girl, have you ever heard of riding on Space Mountain? No.
What's that?
It's free. And they also say, whatever it is, it's growing.
Dear Victoria Elizabeth Turnbull, I don't know who you are, and frankly, your joke about suicide was really terrible, but that doesn't mean you deserve this shit. I am truly sorry and fully empathize with how much you look like you want to punch Doug Bunston in the head. So basically, I was left with the impression that this was like if the Trailer Park Boys decided to make their own horror movie, but then I decided no. The Trailer Park Boys would make a way funnier and more competent film than this trash.
Do you want to see a rocket go, Randy? Does it really launch, Bubbles? Does it really launch? Does the Tin Man have a sheet metal cock?
Unlike some other films we've covered, the cult status of Things does not have a specific origin point. The film was released in limited quantities on video throughout the US and Canada and was rented quite a bit, probably on the basis of this ridiculous cover. However, according to Barry J. Gillis, video store customers would steal the tapes and not return them to the store, causing them to lose revenue. Over time, the limited quantities disappeared from shelves, Mel Lieberman's company went bust, and no more tapes were made. As the internet began to gain more popularity, Barry J. Gillis started getting emails from fans of the film. This led to a campaign to re-release Things, which Gillis and Jordan eventually did through Intervision on DVD. There was also a new run of VHS tapes made, limited to 250 copies. Things has a dedicated fan following, and they're not wrong for enjoying the film. I mean, this might be your thing too, but it is definitely not mine. To me, Things is far more worthy of the title of worst film ever made than nearly any bad movie out there. Besides the mind-numbing technical aspects and the nearly non-existent plot, the story behind the production itself just rubs me the wrong way. It feels to me like these guys were trying to make a cash grab, but didn't have hands, or know what cash looks like. So no, I can't recommend Things to anyone. Consider yourself duly warned. If there's one lesson to be taken from Things, it's this. Anyone can make a movie. If this dry turd can get distributed, anything can. If you want to make a movie right now, do it. Go make your movie. I can state with complete confidence that it will not be worse than Things. Hey everybody, I want to thank you for watching this video and for making it all the way to the end. I really appreciate you watching my content. Some good news on my end, I have just completed my Master of Fine Arts in Digital Cinema, so I am officially done with grad school, which is a very good feeling. I've got quite a few videos in the pipeline that are in various stages of scripting that I'm hoping to get out much quicker now that I'm done with my studies. Stay tuned to this space if you want to see more content like this, and if you have any suggestions, please leave a comment below. I really appreciate your feedback. Thanks.